All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today we're untangling a completely wild, newly intercepted intelligence dossier. And what it reveals is exactly how overseas military escalation triggers a direct, literal, logistical, and financial collapse right in your local community. We're looking at raw operational data from a systemic threat model. It's basically a real-world sand table that proves the undeniable link between high-level international geopolitics and the very physical reality of your local grocery store.
So here is how we're breaking this massive web down today. First, the kinetic catalyst. Then, the global logistics squeeze, followed by the financial friction. After that, we'll hit the geopolitical realignment, the clash between paper and physical reality, and finally, the domestic austerity.
Okay, starting off with part 1, the kinetic catalyst, the true cost of escalation.
To really grasp how this all builds, we have to start with the staggering material costs of the recent Middle Eastern operations outlined in this intelligence brief. $29 billion. That massive figure is the baseline burn rate for just the opening 6-week phase of military operations. Based on leaked congressional testimony in the dossier, this number completely shatters all the earlier budget estimates. I mean, it is a financial black hole, and the state has to fund it immediately, which sets off a total chain reaction that we're going to track all the way to your wallet.
Now, the dossier exposes something it calls the glass underbelly of military logistics. We have a verified ledger of 42 damaged or destroyed U.S. aircraft in just that single 6-week campaign. But when you really dig into the breakdown, the true crisis isn't just the loss of the high-end strike corps, which actually includes a damaged F-35. The real terminal fracture point is the logistical logjam. We are talking about the loss of irreplaceable KC-135 refueling tankers and an AWACS radar plane. These are multi-million-dollar assets that literally aren't in active production anymore. So to replace them, the system has to violently pivot an astronomical amount of capital away from the civilian sector.
Moving right along to Section 2, Global Logistics Squeeze, the Supply Chain Infarction.
You see, that overseas kinetic friction instantly bleeds into our global shipping lanes. Now, mainstream models, like the ones from the UN, claim we have a solid 6-month supply cushion before things get really tight, but the tactical data paints a much more brutal mechanical reality. It doesn't take 6 months. From the second an ocean blockade goes hot, marine war risk insurance voids almost on day 1, which just freezes commercial fleets in their tracks. By day 14, the raw inputs for synthetic fertilizer snap because global exporters are totally cut off. And by day 30, because our modern food networks run on super tight 3 to 5 day rotating inventories, we see a just-in-time retail collapse straight to empty grocery shelves.
And domestically, it is just as bleak. The independent logistics network is undergoing what is essentially a mass extinction event. We're tracking a 20% spot market capitulation rate. That means independent, on-demand truckers aren't just taking a temporary hit, they're going completely bankrupt and liquidating. Dealerships are reporting unprecedented voluntary surrenders of heavy rigs, literally just abandoned at truck stops because operators are walking away from unsustainable debt. Why is this happening? Because soaring fuel costs have collided head-on with a completely exhausted consumer base, meaning middle-class discretionary shipping demand has totally vanished.
Which brings us to Section 3, the financial friction, the triangle. So this physical supply chain collapse creates a massive, highly localized financial shockwave, and it forces us to ask a really critical question. Who actually controls monetary policy during a systemic crisis? I mean, right now, the Federal Reserve is experiencing an unprecedented internal fracture. The people who are supposedly steering the ship are actively yanking the wheel in completely opposite directions.
What we've got is a historic split-command dynamic playing out right in front of us. On one hand, you have the newly confirmed Chairman Kevin Warsh, who was controversially sworn in at the White House. That's a highly symbolic move showing he's fully aligned with the executive branch's desire to stabilize yields and fund these military operations. But on the exact opposite side, former Chair Jerome Powell is still on the Board of Governors, flat out refusing to vacate his seat, basically acting as an institutional anchor for orthodox, tight money banking policies.
And while the Fed is literally battling internally, the reality on the ground for the consumer is downright terrifying. Structural inflation is running incredibly hot. We saw a 0.9% month-over-month spike in March, and then another 0.6% in April. That locks in a 3.8% annual acceleration. And here's the kicker. Because this inflation is being driven by physical fuel constraints and war premiums, not just, eager shoppers spending money, it absolutely guarantees that interest rates are going to stay painfully high.
All right, part 4, geopolitical realignment, the shifting global board. While all this is happening, International alliances are actively exploiting this Western financial and military friction. It's fascinating. While the West is totally pinned down maintaining a resource-heavy maritime blockade, the Sino-Russian axis is intentionally weaponizing overland supply chains. By establishing Eurasian overland ring fencing, they completely bypass those maritime choke points. Meanwhile, the broader BRICS coalition is moving fast to accelerate a non-SWIFT, commodity-backed clearing network. Their goal? To actively starve the Eurodollar system, which is the offshore network of global trade finance of vital liquidity.
This massive shifting board has caused some immense strain within the U.S. war cabinet itself. The intelligence brief points to a hard realization within the White House that the U.S. was basically maneuvered into a prolonged proxy trap, all based on flawed early intelligence that promised a quick, short-term operation. But because Israel's defense architecture relies 100% on an uninterrupted U.S. logistical supply line, the source notes the White House is now applying a very hard, unilateral squeeze to dictate the exit timeline and force a ceasefire.
But of course, ending the conflict isn't quite that simple. We are now dealing with the lingering threat of what's called extra-regional extension. The intel confirms the IRGC recently struck the electrical grid of the Baraka nuclear power plant over in the UAE. Now, they intentionally avoided the reactor core itself and just hit the auxiliary power. Why? To send a crystal-clear message. They have the technical capability and the saturation drone swarms to completely sever the global energy and desalination supply at will if the ceasefire falls apart.
Let's look at Section 5, Paper versus Physical Reality, the Market Illusion. This brings us to the massive, glaring disconnect between what the stock market is saying and what physical reality actually dictates. We are looking at two totally different worlds right now. On one side, you have perceived value, the paper market. That's driven by algorithmic keyword bots reacting in milliseconds to political tweets about peace, artificially suppressing the price of crude on your screen. But on the flip side is tangible worth, the actual physical ledger. We have a 3.9 million barrel per day deficit, the lowest Saudi output since 1990, and physically destroyed infrastructure. And let's be real here, a social media post cannot magically patch a bombed oil pipeline. So ultimately, these temporary relief rallies you see on the stock market, they are often just engineered wealth transfers. The Intel scrape actually highlights a massive $800 million regulatory probe into Tier 1 trading firms. They're investigating massive algorithmic front-running happening right ahead of executive social media pronouncements. They are dumping huge blocks of oil futures right before surprise announcements hit the web. These are not signs of structural economic stability. They are just massive capital extractions hiding a fundamentally ruined logistics network. Finally, Part 6, the domestic austerity, the consumer squeeze.
Bringing this all the way back to your neighborhood, this global convergence demands a massive extraction of capital directly from the civilian sphere. Just to fund the new $1.5 trillion defense budget and to sustain a truly mind-boggling $1 billion daily combat burn rate, the state mathematically has to dismantle the middle-class safety net. It plays out in three painful steps. First, reallocating $1.15 trillion in discretionary taxes. Second, actively raiding $350 billion from mandatory social entitlements, which means tightening eligibility and freezing your cost of living adjustments. And third, flat-out cannibalizing the funds that were meant for your local civilian municipal infrastructure.
So what does this actually mean for you on a day-to-day basis? Well, locally, you're facing a terminal erosion of your purchasing power. You are being starved of credit by a highly defensive Federal Reserve, with credit card interest rates structurally pinned way up above 22%, which leads to the complete exhaustion of unsecured debt. And, thanks to that clotted supply chain we talked about, you're going to face highly localized stockouts of retail products. The system is literally shedding its civilian liabilities just to preserve its military capabilities.
The Intel dossier makes one thing absolutely, unequivocally clear. The paper ledger has completely lost all tracking fidelity with reality. That 6-month buffer the mainstream talks about, it's a bureaucratic illusion. We are moving headfirst into a period where survival depends on tangible, localized assets, not digital bank balances, which really leaves us with one massive question to chew on. Is your household still relying on the illusion of paper buffers, or have you established true physical resilience for when the dominoes finally hit the floor?